Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe. Today we're going to look at what I call a Shark Gill. And we've seen some examples of this in architecture and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But basically, in a nutshell, at the end of the day, what we have is we can control the number of gills. So you see that I'm adding more or less. And then we can control the shape of those gills. So I can lower those down, which is essentially closing that slit or raise it up. I can change the position of that, so I can do the wave with it. That's pretty fun. Alright, so we're going to look at how to do that today. And before we jump into that, just want to remind you, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do so, please. And then click on the little bell to receive the notifications so you don't miss any of my videos. Lots of videos here, and today is New Year's Day 2020. So happy New Year's from Chicago. Wow, I can't believe it's 2020. I've been waiting for that year. It sounds like a pretty cool year, 2020. So please subscribe to my channel. Also on Instagram, connect with me on Instagram at my first name Alfonso _ my last name Peluso. And recently I shared some images of my students using Grasshopper, Weaverbird, Mesh Plus, and then 3D printing on our Z print, which can print full color, and these got a pretty good response of those full color prints. So if you haven't connected with me on Instagram, please do so. Okay, back to the Shark Gill. So Future Systems was a London-based architectural firm, and Jan Klapicki died several years ago, and his wife Amanda Levette is now she has her own architecture firm. But some of their projects, if we look at Amanda Levette's, this is 10 Hills Place, and if we look at this facade, it's a similar example to a Shark Gill, but this is a vertical application. This is a really cool facade system here with the Shark Gill opening. And then Future Systems, they had done the Ferrari Museum in, I think it's in Bologna, Italy, where the roof had these similar shark gills. And another really cool project is this Kinetic facade by Soma. And if I play this video, you're going to see these fins here opening and closing. So this is real-time Grasshopper. I always love to see a real-world example of something that we're doing in Grasshopper, so that we can, confirm that what we're doing isn't just make-believe, but we can see some examples out in the real world. So here you see that facade again opening and closing. So that's pretty cool. All right, so let's jump back over to Rhino and Grasshopper. And you see our finished definition. That's where we're going to end up. It's going to go ahead and we'll just, why don't we just for now disable that. All right, we'll get started here. So here is our outline. So I've organized this in 3 separate parts. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a flat surface and we're going to deform that surface. And then with that deformed surface, we're going to rebuild it. We're going to add some surface points, point deform, and then this repeat data. This is something really cool. I was teaching this in class over the summer, and one of my students looked at the way I was doing it and said, "Hey, why don't you try repeat data?" And I did, and I love it. I love learning from my students, and I can learn from you guys. So put some things in the comments below. So after we deform the surface, we're going to be lifting some points to create the Shark Gill opening. And then we're going to be looking at the data tree. I think data tree is something really important to start to understand and grasp in Grasshopper. So we're going to look at a couple ways to work with data trees. And this tutorial is one of those where you have to know a little bit about working with data trees. So we're just going to start out by making a surface. There's my dog Rita in the background. She must see a squirrel, so you might hear her a couple times today. Alright, so let's go ahead and plug this in. Alright, so making a plane, I'm just making this 100 by 100 depending on what units you're in. I think I'm working in feet right now, so that's 100 feet by 100 feet. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to rebuild that surface so that this surface can become flexible and we can deform it. So I'm going to bring out a rebuild surface. Okay, so this rebuild surface, you may not have this. This comes from a plugin Lunchbox. So if you search Grasshopper 3D Lunchbox, you'll see a great plugin there, and you can download that. It's a free plugin. It'll allow you to rebuild a surface. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and rebuild the surface, and the U and V degree right now it's set to, by default it's set to 3 and 3, and that's the curvature, and then the number of segments is set to 10 and 10. We'll see if we have to adjust that in a little bit. Okay, let's keep moving with this. So we have the rebuilt surface. So now we're going to place some points on that surface using surface points. Okay, so now a couple things I want to talk about. So I'm working with the draw icons, and I'm also working with full names. I think this is a pretty good place, or way, not a place, but a way to work in Grasshopper. You know, we know that typically Grasshopper, when you open it, it looks like that. And most people will use the draw icons. I'm using the draw icons and the draw full names. Now there is a plugin out there called bifocals, and I think this is a pretty cool plugin, because what that does when I drop that bifocal down is it shows you what these capsules are, so it's easier for you guys to follow along with me. So something new for 2020, Happy New Year. So plane surface, now you see that there, rebuild surface, and surface points. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and there you see the surface points. And I can raise and lower those surface points by adding a number slider to the U and the V. Okay, so this is important for us when we're making our curvature through those points. So we'll be coming back. I'm gonna want to increase that a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. We can do it now. So maybe something like 8 points. Okay. Alright, so I need to see these points. I need to see what numbers those points have associated with them. So I'm going to double click and I'm going to type in point list. Point list, and I'm going to bring out that point list capsule. And it's going to put a number on each one of those points. You can't see it because the size is really small at the moment. So let's try something like 12 feet. That's going to be really big, and then we can make those smaller. Okay, so now I can see what my points are. Okay, because we're going to want to lift some points right down, right down the middle. We're going to raise some points. Okay, so let's look at adjusting these numbers here. All right, so that 9 and that 7. So when this is an odd number, I'm getting some points right down the middle. So let's try 7, and we're going to go ahead and raise these points. So I'm going to be calling out those points to raise, and to raise those points, I'm going to use a point deform. Okay, so the geometry that I'm deforming is going to be my rebuilt surface. Now the points that I'm going to be lifting, those I'm going to call out through a list item. Okay, so I'm going to plug my list of points into here, And the indices I'm going to use are going to be, looks like 3, 10, 17, 24, 31, 38, and 45. So I'm going to go ahead and bring out a panel, and I'm going to type those in. So 3, 10, 17, and I'm putting them on their own line. So I'm hitting enter after each one of these. Okay, so those are my list of points. I'm not going to hit enter after the last one. Now I'm going to plug this in, and we're going to see, well, we're going to get an error. Okay, we're going to get an error because this needs to be multi-line data. So each one of these numbers needs to be on its own line item. So I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to choose multi-line data. And you're going to see that that capsule is now ready to go. It's no longer red. So I'm going to plug these in. And now this point to form, I'm going to get an error on that once I start to add the height that I want to lift these points. So let's say that I'm going to lift these in the Z direction, so vertically, and I'm going to lift this up 50, say 50 feet. I'm going to plug that in, and I'm going to plug that into motion, and that's going to become red, because what it needs is it needs a value for each one of these points, and right now we just have one value. So I'm going to need a value for each one. And this is where the repeat data comes in. So this repeat data. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to plug in our item for this. Let me go back. I'm glad I kept this one out. Glad I kept that one out. So again, this is new. Someone showed it to me over the summer, so I'm getting to share it with you guys. Okay, so let's see how this is going to work. Let's go ahead and enable all of this. All right, so got everything selected. Right click, enable this. Let's see what we have down here. Okay. Alright, so we're using a list length coming out of our panel. That's getting plugged into that. Alright, so this looks like this is the value that we're lifting in the Z direction. So that's where we have our 50 set, and this is our list length. So let's go ahead and disable that, and we'll come back up here. Okay, so alright, so we're gonna need a list length, which tells it how many times to repeat that data. So list length. Okay, so I'm going to plug that in. Alright, and you're going to get, right here we have 0 through 6, so we have 7 items coming out of there, so that's our list length. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. Okay. Alright, there's our list length. And our data, let's take another quick look down here. Alright, so that's going right into the Z vector. So that needs to be placed right in here, right between those. And then this 50 is going to go into the data. Alright, so let's clean this up. Loving this repeat data. I don't know why I've never seen it before or used it before, but it really works well with something like this. Sometimes you gotta have the right application for it. Okay. So let's take a look at what we have. We're just manipulating that. That's something I could have made in Rhino, but I think it's important to know how to do that in Grasshopper. So let's select that. We don't have to do that. Just want you guys to be able to see this a little bit better. Alright, so I can raise and lower this, right? Alright, so just gonna keep it right there for now. Alright, so let's start to turn off some of the things that we are seeing in Grasshopper. One of the things I notice with my students is they tend to work with too many objects turned on. So I'm going to start to turn some of those objects off. So I have my point deform selected. I'm going to use the shortcut Shift Control I, which is an invert selection, and I'm going to right click and choose preview off. Okay, so I have just my last capsule, my point deform. Okay, and that's that. If we look at this concludes this part of it. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at this lift points, this divide surface, and this domain. Okay, so let's organize some of this a little bit better here. So I'm going to take all of this stuff, including this. Okay. I'm going to copy and paste the little scribble I have down here below. Bring that up. Okay, so this is our deformed surface. So I'm going to select that, use my shortcut Control G, group that together, and I can right click on that and go ahead and change the color of it. Okay, give it like an orange color. So that's our deformed surface. Okay, so now we're going to be creating the Shark Gill, and if we go back, let's enable this definition and take a look at something here. Okay. All right, so this is all turned off at the moment. Okay. All right, so what's happening when we look at this is there is this front curve, okay, which is higher than this rear curve. Alright, so we're going to create the two curves, and in this definition here there is a base curve. Okay, there we're going to be able to see this a little bit better. So there's a base curve, and then there's a lifted curve. Okay, so the base curve, let's go back to that one. Base curve and lifted curve. So we have to create these two, base and lifted. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. So let's, okay, and over here in our little outline here, so we're going to be dividing the surface. Okay, so let's start with that. So we're going to use a divide surface. Okay, so we'll go ahead and plug that in. Okay. Alright, so now this is going to eventually control the number of fins that we're going to have. And let's go ahead and type in value of 3 for the U count. Okay, so that's what's happening there. This is going to control the number of fins. Okay, so I'm going to right click on that. We'll put number of, we'll call them gills. Okay, number of gills. And I'm going to add a scribble above that just so it's a little easier for me to see at the end of the definition when I want to start to change some of those. So I'm typing in scribble. Alright, so number of gills. Okay, so that's, sometimes I like to group these together and make it a circle by double clicking on the bounding box here, if it's going to let me. That's interesting. I wonder if it's something to do with my bifocals. It's not letting me change the shape of it. Okay. Alright, so I'm gonna have to leave that the way it is now. Alright, so this V count, this is controlling the number of points in the curve. So if I put in a number slider for that, it starts to reduce the amount of points, and I need some points there, so I'm gonna go with 8 points. I like the 8 in this case because I get a point right at the top there. Okay, so now we're gonna lift these points up, and we're gonna want the shape of it to be a bell, like a bell curve, which is a Gaussian graph. So we're gonna actually use a graph mapper to do that. Okay, so let's start to work with this. So if I bring out a move capsule and I plug in my points to that, it raises those up right in the Z direction, straight up in the Z direction. And I want this to be more of a bell curve where these points barely lift here, and then they lift a lot in the middle, and then they barely lift at the very end. So we're going to add a graph mapper. And I'll put some links at the end of this to where I look specifically at a graph mapper and explain graph mapper in more detail. Okay. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to need a few things for this graph mapper to work. I'm going to double click on it. So I guess I'm going to shut this bifocal off for a second. Just curious. That's not it. Alright, so let's go down to graph types and we'll change this to Gaussian. Pull that bifocals back out. Okay. Alright, so here's our graph mapper. So we're going to set up a domain for how high we're going to raise these points up. So we're going to get some values. So down here, I set this up to be, let's go ahead and double click on this. So I set this up to be 25 in the X and 25 in the Y. Okay, so my domain needs to match that. So to get this graph mapper to work, I'm going to need a range and a construct domain. So let's go ahead and add that up here. Alright, so the first thing is my range, and I'm going to plug that in. Okay, and before we move on beyond this range, so how is this range going to work? Well, what I'm essentially doing with the move is I'm applying a value to every one of my points. How many points do I have at the moment? I have 8. So that's being defined here. Those are my number of points. So that's something that I'm going to have to plug into my steps. So I'll plug that into my steps. Now, coming out of the other side of that range, so panels are your best friend. So we want to use these panels often. Okay, so let's see what I have here. So there I actually have 9 values coming out of that. And I need it to match this. I need it to be 8. And so what we're seeing is the way that the range is scripted is it actually adds a value. So what I do here is I right click and I go to expression and I put in x minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and commit the changes to that. So now I have exactly 8 values. Okay, so that's where we're at right now, and what we're going to need now is a domain to control these values in what we're seeing in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and type in construct, and we're going to use a construct domain. Okay, and that's going to go into here, and we're going to use a domain between 0 and 25. And we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so what that means here is our largest value is going to be 25. So right now we're just starting from small to large, from 0 to 25, and we're just getting 8 values. Now on the other side of the graph mapper, we use a panel, and we plug that in. Okay, we're not seeing, this is not working. I'm not getting values between 0 and 25 at all. So the reason that is because my domain inside the graph mapper does not match my domain out here. Okay, if I make this between 0 and 1, okay, now I'm getting values between 0 and 1 here, and not quite what I want on this side. Okay, so that's why I'm changing the domain for that. You know, I'm getting some values here, but I can't, they're not well represented as a bell curve. So let's change this back to 25. And we'll go ahead in this graph mapper. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm changing the X domain maximum to 25 and the Y domain. So there's two domains. There's an X and a Y. So X is between 0 and 25, and Y is between 0 and 25. So that's important. Okay. So now we're getting some small values, and then we get up to a larger value, and then it goes down to the small. And we're not hitting 25 because of the way that this bell curve is set up. Okay, there I'm getting values outside of the graph a little higher than 25 and a little bit lower. All right, so let's actually see this in action. All right, so this is going to go into the direction that we're going to lift these points. We're still going to be lifting them in the Z direction. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Okay. So we're still lifting those in the Z. And you can see that right now that they're barely lifted here when we start, and then they get lifted higher. So let's see this barely lifting. Let's widen this out a little bit. There we go. See that a little bit more. Okay, so those points are following the shape of this graph mapper, and we're going to see that in a second even better. All right. Okay, so hopefully you're still with me. All right. So there we've actually lifted our points. Okay, so I can add. I'm going to go ahead and keep this organized since we started. So this is lift points in a bell shape. Okay, so we've done that. Go ahead and group all this together. Go ahead and change the color of that. Sometimes if you move out of that too fast, it goes away. All right, so we have a nice grouping of all of that. Okay, so let's draw some curves. So we're going to have our original. I'm going to use a scribble for this. So we're going to have our original curves. I'm going to call the original curves. I'm going to call it the base curves. Base curves, and then we're also going to have our lifted curves. Keep typing in what I want to type in the scribble without making the scribble first. Okay, now we're going to have our lifted curves. Okay, so we haven't drawn these yet, so we're going to use an interpolate curve. Which is just an interpolate. Okay, so now the original ones are before I moved it. So if I take those points from the divide surface and I plug it into the vertices, and I'm going to use my half green, half white cylinder here, so you just see those. Okay, so those are the base curves. Okay, and then I'm going to use another interpolate for the lifted curves, and those are going to come from these points that we lifted. Okay, so now if I select both of those, that should be a little bit easier to see. Right now they're not connecting down there, so I'm gonna go ahead and connect it to make it look more like the Shark Gill. I'll close this up together a little bit. Alright, so maybe something like that, a little bit higher. Okay, so that's going to be our starting point. All right, great. So we have our base curves and our lifted curves. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to be able to loft a surface. And when I'm lofting, I want to loft from, depending in which direction I want to loft from, I can loft from this base curve up to the bell curve, and then from this base curve up to the bell curve. Okay, so that requires quite a bit of work to actually do that. Because if we use, let's say that we use our Loft command at the moment. Let's select these, Shift Control I, right click, turn the rest off. Okay, so I have just these capsules on. If I go ahead and I use a Loft and I plug in my base curves and I plug in my lifted curves, okay, you see what's happening. It's just Grasshopper has organized this data perfectly so that it's going to loft between this curve and that curve, and then this curve and that curve, and then this curve and that curve. And what I want to do is I want to actually shift it so that I loft from this base curve up to the bell curve, and then from this base curve up to the bell curve. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that loft. Okay, so I'm saying that I need to shift the list. Okay, now I no longer have a list to shift, because what I have at the moment is I have a data tree. So this is forcing us to know about data trees. Doing this example, and I have students, and they can get away with a lot. They can do a lot without really understanding how data trees work in Grasshopper. But here's one of these examples that forces you to get a decent grasp on it. So I can't shift the data tree. I have to flatten this and turn it into a list, shift the list, and then turn it back into a data tree. So those are the steps that we're going to do now. Let's see what I have over here. And okay, so data tree, I want to introduce you to something called a path mapper. So we have to learn how to flatten, graph, shift. Okay, so we've already looked graph mapper. We've already looked at that. So that was actually part of this this set of capsules above. Okay, so let's continue with this. Alright, so what do you need to know about data tree? What are we looking at? Well, one is when you see the dashed wire, that represents a data tree. And if I go up to display, let's see, is it under, where is my fancy wires? So display, draw fancy wires. So I think by default that's on. I hope so, maybe not, but I guess it's good I'm pointing it out. So draw fancy wires, that gives us information. So that's telling us that this is a data tree, and what a data tree means is it's a list of lists. So this is one list here, all these zeros. This is my second list with the 1, and this is my third list with the 2. Okay, so first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to flatten that list. Okay, now I want to show you guys an advanced method of working with flattening and simplifying in graphs. So an advanced method of working with data trees. And why not, right? And I can probably do a separate video down the road where we look at that outside of an example, but for this we're going to do it inside the Shark Gill. Give you some advanced methods. Now we can use, if I want to flatten something, I can use a flattened tree. If I want to flatten a tree, I can use these capsules to flatten. I can also right click on the curve and I can choose flatten. So when I choose flatten, you're going to see this go from 3 lists with 1 item. Okay, that's one thing I didn't mention, is this is the item where it says 0, 0, 0. So if you're taking some notes, 2 things I want you to know right now. Here's our path. We have 3 paths, or 3 lists, 0, 1, and 2. And then we have an item in each one of those paths, or an item in each one of those lists. So that's what the 0 is there. So when I go ahead and flatten it, you're going to see one path that's going to have 3 items in it. And here we go, 1 path, 3 items, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so that was just too easy. Wasn't it too easy to right click on that and choose flatten? So instead of that, I'm going to introduce you to something a little bit more advanced, which is a path mapper. Okay, here's our path mapper. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to simplify this. Not simplify, I don't want to confuse anyone. We're gonna go ahead and flatten this with the path mapper. So I'm going to plug this in, and I'm going to double click on this. And it has a source and a target. Okay, so my source, I'm going to type in what I have shown here for my path. Okay, I'm going to do that, exactly that. So there's Rita again, must be another squirrel out there. Alright, so I'm going to type in 0, semicolon 0, semicolon 0, semicolon 0. So I have to get exactly what it has here. Exactly what it has here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to close that with my little squiggly bracket there. So that is going to be my source. Okay, my target is, I'm going to flatten this down to one path. So I'm going to go from 4 paths to 1 path. Okay, so I'm going to just put in my 0 and my squiggly bracket there. And what we need to actually see this happen is we need a panel. Okay. Alright, so there you go. That's flattened. So that's flattened using the path mapper. And why use path mapper? There's a lot of reasons to use path mapper. So right now I'm just introducing it to you. Alright, so now we've flattened that list. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and we're gonna shift that list. Okay, so we're going to use a shift list. Okay, now we can shift the list. We flattened it, now we can shift it. So the list that we're going to be shifting, we're going to take that from the path mapper, and it's by default shifting just 1. Okay, so maybe we need to see that graphically, so I'm going to use a panel for that. Make this as small as I can and just plug that into the shift there. Okay, so now we've nothing really. Let's see how I can best represent this or show this the shifted one. It's a little tricky here because it's just a list of curves. But I guess once we loft it, we're going to see the difference. Okay, so now we've flattened it, we've shifted the list. Now we can try our loft and see what happens. Okay, so I'm lofting from these curves over to these. Okay, not what we're looking for. And right here you can see the issues. We have a data tree, we have these dashed lines, and then we just have a flattened list here that we're plugging in. So we got to match the data. We got to regraft, what's called graft a tree. So we need to graft a tree. So we're going to go ahead and do that with a couple ways we can do that. We can do that with a graph tree. That's one way. Let's get a panel out here to see this a little better. Alright, so what we're looking for now is we want this to look just like it did before. Okay, but the order of those is shifted. So just to keep it simple, I introduced you to Path Mapper. We can use Path Mapper to actually graph the tree. So let's go ahead and bring out our Path Mapper. And I could right click on this list and I could choose graph. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. That's what we want to see. Let's do that with, let's go ahead and do that with a Path Mapper. So, alright, so let's plug this in. Alright, so with this Path Mapper, we're going to graph the tree. So I'm going to match what I see there. So 0, semicolon 0. Okay, we're matching that. And then we have items on the side. And for the items, I'm just going to actually use the word item, or I could simplify that and use an I. Let's go with that. Okay, so the items are outside of the path. So we're going to take, what we're going to tell it for the target is make each one of these items a path. Okay, here's where the path lies, in this second 0 there. So you're going to see this in my target. I'm going to use my squiggly bracket, I'm going to use 0, semicolon, and I'm going to use the word item. And then I'm going to use my squiggly bracket to close it. So I'm saying make each one of these items, these 0, 1, 2, 3, make them a path value. I know this is pretty advanced, but something good to get under your belt here. So when I click OK, fingers crossed, let's see when I plug that in if it's a data tree. Perfect. Here's our data tree. All right, let's try our loft now and see what we have here. Okay, so I'm lofting between my base curves up to my bell curves. All right. All right, let's see what we have here. Where's my shift? Looking at this, okay. All right. This is not working, and I know why. And I have a video that I'm going to show, give you a link to at the end of this. And so one reason is I have this plugged in not from the tree. Okay, so that's one reason. It's plugged in before it becomes a data tree. So let's go ahead and unplug that. Okay, so we'll go to disconnect and we're going to unplug our shift list. This has to come from the path mapper. Okay, nothing's happening with the loft, right? And this is where a lot of people get really frustrated with the loft. Like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? So if I look at a panel here coming from my base curves and I look at the path, it's structured to be 1, 2, 3, 4 branches. Okay, and coming out of here, I only have 2 branches. So I should be able to use this path mapper to add those couple more branches that I need just by adding in the 0, semicolon, 0, semicolon. Okay, so now I'm back up to 4. All right. There you see the path mapper in action. You might need to rewind and go through this a couple times on your own to fully get it, but that's okay. That's the whole idea of this channel. All right, we're getting really close. We're getting really close. What we have here is we have an extra loft in here. Okay, we have an extra loft, and we're just going to be removing that out of there because we have 3 lofts total, and we're going to remove the last loft. So let's use our panel. Okay, we don't need the 3rd loft. We just need the 2, 1, 2 for right now. So we're going to use a call. I could say for this one, I know we're going to add. We're going to be adding. I was going to say call index and use 3, but we're going to be adding. We're going to add more gills to this at some point. So I don't want to use that because our number of gills can go up, from however many we need. So we just need to remove the last one. Okay, so let's look at this. I'm thinking a list length and then use that last value, and I might be overdoing it, but I guess that's what I used looking down here. So list length and call nth. Okay. All right. So, and you guys down in the comments, if you know a better way to do that, let me know. But I'm always going to want to remove the last item in this list. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten it. I'm taking the easy route. Guys. All right. So flatten. And then I'm going to always want that to remove the last item. So I'm going to use a call nth. Okay, and here's my list of untrimmed surfaces here. And which ones do I want to remove? I'm going to want to remove the very last one, so I'm going to use a list length, which is always going to return the last item in this list. We'll see that in a second. Right now it's 4. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Let's shut off our original loft. Turn that off, preview off. Okay. Okay, so right now this is number of items using 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 5th item. Okay, so as we reduce this, go all the way back here to number of gills. As we reduce this, if I reduce that to say 2, then this is probably giving me a 3 coming out. Okay, so this is parametric right now. This is working great parametrically. Let's just clean up a few things here. Alright, so we only need to see what's coming out the very end here. So I'm going to use a custom preview, and here's going to be my geometry. And there you see it, by default it's the Pepto-Bismol pink, which I love, but I can always use a color swatch. Okay, if I plug this color swatch, it's going to change to that color, whatever this color is. Okay, so I can go through all the colors there. Let's go with that nice deep purple. Alright, so let's, I'm going to select that, Shift Control I, right click, preview off. Alright, so there we have it. Let's take a better look at this. Let's get this thing working. Alright, so a few things that we have working parametrically. One, we have the number of gills, so I can raise and lower that. It's cool, it goes down to 0. It doesn't go down to 0, but it goes down to 1. So there's 1 gill. You're looking at 2 gills, 3 gills, 4 gills. Alright, and then we can use our graph mapper, which I didn't add a scribble, but this controls our shape. So this is how much those are open. And we saw this a little bit earlier where we can control the shape of those. And could do the wave. Alright, there you have it, the Shark Gills. Alright, so again, Happy New Year. I hope wherever you guys are at, I'm from Chicago. It's a winter day here, and it's not too bad, it's not too cold. There's a little dusting of snow on the ground at the moment. And it's 2020, so Happy New Year. And you know, my wife asked me yesterday, what is your New Year's resolution? And I said that my New Year's resolution is to make more videos. So I'm going to make more YouTube videos this year. How many? I'm not sure. To start off with, I'm going to go for 3 a week. I didn't quite make the 1 a week, but I'm gonna go for 3 a week. All right, so leave some comments down below if you found this video helpful. Go ahead and give it a like, give it a thumbs up. And I'm loving this community that we're building, this YouTube community that we're building. And one of my goals, hopefully soon in the new year, is to get to 5,000 subscribers. I'm pretty close, 4,780. So we're pretty close to 5,000. So go ahead and help me get there by clicking on the subscribe button. Follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.